The rain had a sound that night, soft, steady, like someone breathing through tears, in a small Oregon town. Emily Carter sat by the window of her tiny apartment, her phone trembling in her hand. A single message glowed on the cracked screen. Your brother has 3 days. Pay up, or you'll lose him. Outside, thunder rolled through the valley, but inside, it was the silence that hurt more. Emily was a music teacher's gentle, steady, always the one others turned to for calm. But tonight, calm was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her hands were cold, her heartbeat uneven, and for the first time, she didn't know who to call. Somewhere out there, her brother, her only family, was in danger, and the world felt merciless, as if kindness had been priced too high. Yet life, in its strange way, was already turning a page, because desperation has a way of leading us where we least expect, into rooms of marble and glass, into the path of people we think we'll never understand, and sometimes into the arms of someone who will change everything. Before the night is over, Emily's quiet life will collide with a man whose heart seems made of ice, and she will learn that even the coldest souls can burn. The wind carried the smell of rain and pine through the cracked window, rustling the thin curtains like a restless whisper. Emily Carter sat at her small kitchen table, a chipped mug of chamomile tea cooling beside an open lesson plan. The clock on the wall ticked quietly, steady as her breath, until her phone buzzed. Once, then again. She glanced at it, expecting another reminder from the school board, maybe a parent's text about piano lessons. But what she saw froze the air in her lungs. Your brother has 3 days. Pay up, or you'll lose him. No name, no number. Just those 12 words glowing against the dark screen. For a long moment, Emily didn't move. The only sound was the slow dripping of the faucet, each drop landing like a countdown. Then she stood, her chair scraping against the linoleum, heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her brother, Daniel, her only family. He had promised her he was done with gambling, that he was getting better, that he wouldn't fall back into that world again. Her hands trembled as she typed back, "Who is this?" No answer. Outside, thunder rolled across the Oregon hills. The town of Willow Creek, quiet, gentle, known for its spring festivals and music recitals, suddenly felt like a stranger. Emily stared at the window, watching the rain streak down the glass like tears, and felt the kind of fear that empties a person from the inside out. She grabbed her coat, her keys, her phone. There wasn't time to think, only to move. The roads were slick with rain, reflecting the yellow glow of the old street lamps. She drove toward Daniel's small apartment on the edge of town, her headlights slicing through the fog. The same roads she'd taken every morning to school now looked endless. When she arrived, his door was locked, his car gone. The apartment smelled faintly of smoke and cheap beer. A few crumpled envelopes lay scattered on the counter, overdue bills, collection notices. Her stomach turned. Then she found the photo, an old one of the two of them at the lake, years ago, their smiles bright and easy. She sank into a chair, pressing the picture against her chest. "Danny, what did you do this time?" Her phone buzzed again. A new message. "We know where you work. Miss Carter, don't waste time." Emily swallowed hard. Her throat felt dry, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She thought about calling the police. But what could she say? A stranger texted me, they'd tell her to wait, to stay calm. But she knew better. This wasn't a prank. This was real. Back in her car, the wipers thudded rhythmically, a metronome for her racing thoughts. Every solution she reached for slipped away. She didn't have savings. Her salary barely covered rent and Daniel's rehab payments. The banks had already said no once before, and her mother's old piano, the one she'd inherited, was worth more in memories than in money. By midnight, the rain had turned to a mist that blurred the town lights into a hazy glow. Emily parked by the music school, where the hall windows shone faintly from the security lights inside. She pressed her forehead to the steering wheel and closed her eyes. She remembered Daniel at 17, standing on her porch, promising he'd get out of trouble just this once. She remembered the first time he vanished for days, how she'd found him in a motel room, pale and shaking. She'd sworn she would never go through that again. But here she was, again. Her phone buzzed a third time, and she jumped. 3 days, 2 words. That was all. Something in her broke quietly. Not in anger, but in exhaustion, the kind that comes from fighting for someone you love when the world doesn't seem to love them back. She looked up, through the fogged windshield, and whispered, "Please, just let me find a way. And maybe somewhere beyond the dark." The night listened, because even as she sat there, clutching her phone, fate was already shifting its weight. Somewhere across the city, a man in a glass tower signed a document with her brother's name on it, a name tied to a debt now owned by someone else. Someone powerful, someone cold, the kind of man whose world she had never touched and never meant to. Emily didn't know it yet, but this night would draw a line straight to him, to the man who would change everything she thought she knew about cruelty, mercy, and love. She started the car again, not knowing where she was going, only that she couldn't stay still. The rain followed her, steady and unrelenting, like a promise. As the town disappeared behind her, she whispered to the empty passenger seat, "Hold on, Danny, just hold on." And somewhere far ahead, past the mist and the city lights, a world she'd never known was waiting quiet, vast, and already reaching out to her. The first step had been taken. The rest was no longer hers to control. The rain hadn't stopped. It drummed softly on the roof of her car, a rhythm that followed her everywhere she went that night. By now, her coat was soaked through, her shoes heavy with water, and her hair clung to her cheeks like silk threads. Still, Emily kept walking from one faint hope to another. At the first bank, the clerk smiled politely, tapping her manicured nails on the desk. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter, without collateral, there's nothing we can do." Her voice was smooth, practiced, and it made Emily feel smaller than she already did. She tried again at another branch, then another. Each time, the same words, the same look, sympathy mixed with distance. By midnight, she'd called every friend she could think of, old classmates, colleagues, even a former student's parent who once said, "If you ever need anything, just ask." They were kind. They offered prayers, not money, and prayers, as gentle as they were. Couldn't buy time. When the last call ended, Emily stood beneath the awning of a closed cafe, clutching her phone. The rain came in sideways now, finding her even in the shadows. Her breath misted in the cold air, and for a moment, she didn't know where else to go. The world around her blurred into gray, wet asphalt, flickering lights, passing cars that didn't slow down. People were still awake in this town, some laughing in bars, others hurrying home with umbrellas. All of them seemed to have somewhere to belong. She had only the storm. She started walking again, her steps aimless at first, past the gas station, past the row of dark shops, her reflection sliding along the puddles like a ghost. She thought about Daniel, her brother, his crooked smile, the way he used to say, "You worry too much. I'll be fine, fine." Such a small, impossible word. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket, a phantom vibration. No message, just her mind playing tricks. By 2 a.m, her legs ached, and her fingers were numb. She found herself crossing into the richer part of town, a place of wide streets, gated houses, and trees trimmed into perfect shapes. The kind of neighborhood she used to drive through on her way to the city concerts, always as an outsider looking in. Here, even the rain seemed quieter, more polite. The sidewalks gleamed under streetlights, and the air smelled faintly of cedar and perfume. Emily hugged her coat tighter around herself, her breath shallow. Her shoes squelched with every step. She passed a boutique with tall glass windows, mannequins dressed in gowns that shimmered like water. She thought how absurd it was, how these dresses probably cost more than her entire year's salary. Yet, for a brief moment, She imagined herself inside that world dry, warm, untouched by desperation. Then she blinked, and the image faded. The rain thickened again, relentless. She ducked beneath a stone archway, watching the puddles dance under the golden lights. Somewhere nearby, music floated faintly through the air, soft jazz, the kind that fills expensive restaurants after midnight. Her stomach clenched. She couldn't remember when she'd last eaten. The warm scent of butter and herbs drifted out as a waiter opened a door to let someone in. The restaurant sign glowed above her lever door. Gold letters, elegant, untouchable. She almost smiled. "Gold glass," she whispered. "Seems about right." For a while, she just stood there, staring through the rain-streaked window. Inside, people laughed softly over candlelight, wine glasses catching the glow. It looked like another planet, one where pain didn't exist. And yet, something kept her rooted there, just outside the glass. Maybe it was the warmth. Maybe it was the illusion that she could still be seen by someone. A car slowed behind her, its tires hissing on the wet pavement. She turned slightly, shielding her face from the headlights. The sleek black vehicle came to a stop near the curb. The window rolled down, and a man's voice, deep, steady, broke through the sound of rain. "Miss Carter." Her heart stumbled. The voice knew her name. She took a hesitant step back, clutching her purse like armor. "Who's asking?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened the car door and stepped out, the rain instantly beating on his dark coat. His movements were calm, deliberate, as if the storm itself bowed out of his way. "You've had a difficult night," he said. His tone wasn't kind, but it wasn't cruel either, just certain, like he'd been expecting her. "Get in. You're freezing." She shook her head. "I don't know you." He nodded once, almost approvingly, as if her caution confirmed something he already believed. "Fair, but I know you, Miss Carter, and I know about your brother." The world seemed to tilt slightly beneath her feet. "Daniel, yes. How do you know about him?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, dry, untouched by the rain. "I believe we should talk," he said, his eyes meeting hers through the mist. They were gray, sharp, the kind that didn't miss much. Emily hesitated, her heart hammering. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but something in his calmness, or maybe her exhaustion, made her pause. The rain fell harder, a curtain of silver between them. She could barely see his face now, only the outline tall, controlled, like someone who never lost his footing. He held the car door open again. "Please, you don't have to be afraid." But she was, of him, of herself, of what came next. And yet, standing there, drenched and desperate, she realized something. Fear was no longer a reason strong enough to stop her. She had already lost too much. Slowly, she stepped closer, her shoes squelching on the pavement. The car's interior light spilled onto her face, catching the shimmer of rain on her skin. She stopped just short of the door. "Who are you?" she whispered. The faintest smile touched his lips, more of a shadow than a gesture. "Someone who can help." A pause, heavy and full of unseen promises. Then he added, "My name is Liam West." Lightning flashed in the distance, and for an instant, she saw him clearly. The man who owned the kind of world she'd never been part of. The man who had somehow been waiting for her. Emily's breath caught, her heart unsure whether to race or to stop. And as she finally stepped into the car, leaving the storm behind, a quiet thought crossed her mind, one that would haunt her later. Sometimes, the moment that saves you doesn't feel like salvation at all. The sound of rain softened as the car stopped in front of a row of golden lights. Through the fogged window, Emily saw the glow of chandeliers, their reflections rippling across the wet pavement like small suns. The restaurant stood there elegant, quiet, impossible to ignore. Le Verre d'Or. She had seen it once in a magazine, the kind of place where the powerful met to negotiate, to celebrate, to hide. Not where someone like her belonged. The driver opened her door, The warmth of the city air mixed with the faint scent of wet asphalt and perfume drifting from inside. She hesitated, one foot still on the curb. Her reflection in the glass door looked like a stranger hair damp, coat clinging to her, eyes too wide to hide the fear. Then a voice broke through the soft hum of rain, low, clear, unmistakably certain. "Miss Carter, I've been waiting for you." She froze. The sound came from near the entrance. A tall man stepped out from under the awning, his dark suit immaculate despite the storm, his tie perfectly knotted, his shoes gleaming even under the rain. Every movement seemed deliberate, as if the world adjusted itself around him. For a second, Emily thought she must have misheard. "You know me," she managed. He inclined his head slightly. Liam West. The name settled between them like a weight. Even she had heard it before, the tech billionaire who built an empire from nothing, a man both admired and feared, the kind of person whose name appeared in business journals, not whispered in the rain. Her mouth went dry. "Why would someone like you?" "Because your brother owes me?" he interrupted, his tone calm but cutting. "And because tonight, you're the only person who can decide what happens next." For a moment, she forgot to breathe. The sound of rain filled the silence between them. Then he turned toward the restaurant doors. "Come in. You shouldn't be standing out here." She wanted to refuse, to demand answers right there in the street. But the thought of Daniel, his voice, his laugh, his mistakes pulled her forward. Her feet moved before her mind caught up. Inside, warmth wrapped around her like a blanket. The hum of soft music floated through the air, violins and piano, slow and careful. The lights were dim but golden, catching on crystal glasses and silver cutlery. She could smell rosemary, butter, and the faintest trace of something sweet, like caramelized sugar. Liam led her to a corner table near a tall window. A waiter appeared instantly, pulling out a chair for her. She sat down, careful not to drip too much onto the pristine floor. He gestured for her to order, but she shook her head. Her throat felt too tight for food. For a while, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was heavy, measured. Liam finally leaned back, studying her with eyes the color of cold metal. "You're younger than I expected," he said, "and much too calm for someone standing on the edge of a disaster." Emily blinked. "I'm not calm," she whispered. He tilted his head slightly, as though testing the truth in her voice. Then he nodded once. "Fair." Another pause. Then he reached into his jacket and placed a small black folder on the table. Its surface gleamed under the light. "Your brother's debt," he said simply. She looked down. Rows of numbers, signatures, dates, words she couldn't fully understand, except for one total, due $162,000. Her stomach dropped. "I've paid it," Liam continued, "or rather acquired it." Her eyes flew to his face. "You bought it?" "Yes." His tone was as casual as if he'd bought a coffee. "That means Daniel no longer owes the money to the people who would have hurt him. He owes it to me." Her breath caught. "Then what do you want?" He watched her for a moment before answering. "Something you can give." She swallowed. "I don't have money." "I'm aware." His voice softened slightly, not with sympathy, but with a kind of restrained patience. "I'm not asking for that." He leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on the table. The dim light caught the sharp lines of his jaw, the quiet control in his movements. "I need someone," he said, "to stand beside me. Publicly." Emily frowned. "What do you mean, a companion?" he replied. "A fiancé, to be precise." The word hit her like a sudden gust of wind. "Excuse me, I have a merger negotiation coming up. Investors, press, the entire board, they expect stability, warmth, humanity." He said the last word as if it were foreign to him. "Unfortunately, I'm not known for that." Emily stared at him, trying to understand whether this was a joke. His expression didn't move. You want me to pretend to be engaged to you? Yes. She almost laughed, but the sound never made it past her throat. You don't even know me. That's the point, he said quietly. You're not from my world, which makes you believable. He let that sink in. Then, as if to make it all sound simple, he added, 6 months. You'll live in my residence, attend events, smile for cameras when necessary. In return, I'll erase your brother's debt completely. Emily's mind spun. The world felt unreal, like she was trapped inside someone else's dream. And if I say no, Liam's gaze didn't waver, then the debt returns to its previous owners. And you already know what they're capable of. The air between them shifted. She looked down at her trembling hands, at the reflection of candlelight dancing across the tablecloth. I'm not someone you can buy, she whispered. He didn't argue. Maybe not. But tonight, you have to decide whether pride is worth your brother's life. She looked up sharply, anger flashing through the exhaustion. But what she saw in his eyes wasn't cruelty. It was something colder clarity. A man who didn't deal in kindness because he didn't believe in it anymore. The silence stretched again. Rain streaked across the tall window behind him, soft and endless. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice trembling but steady. I need time to think. You have until morning, he said simply. Then he stood, signaling the waiter, as he walked away. The space he left behind seemed to hum with everything unsaid. Emily sat there long after he disappeared into the rain. The black folder lay before her, untouched, heavy with choices she didn't want to make. Outside, the city lights blurred behind the glass, gold and silver melting together in the storm. Her reflection wavered there, small, uncertain, caught between fear and something she couldn't yet name. And somewhere deep inside her, a quiet voice whispered what she refused to admit aloud. Nothing about this night will ever leave her the same. Morning found Emily wide awake long before the sun. She hadn't slept, only drifted in and out of thoughts that kept her suspended between fear and disbelief. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean, shining with that strange stillness that comes after a storm. She stood by her apartment window, staring at the gray light spilling across the horizon, and whispered to herself. It wasn't a dream. The black folder still sat on her table, its edges damp where her fingers had held it too long. Inside it, her brother's name was written in ink she could never erase. And somewhere beneath that, the name Liam West, the man who now held both her brother's debt and her fate. By 8, she'd made her decision. Not because she wanted to, because she had no other choice left. She dressed simply, in the same navy coat she wore to school, and tied her hair back with a ribbon that had once belonged to her mother. The gesture was small, but it steadied her. Then she took a cab to the address printed on the business card Liam had left. The building rose like glass caught in sunlight, tall, sharp, unyielding. When she stepped inside, the marble floor reflected her like a mirror. Everything smelled faintly of cedar and something colder, something metallic. The receptionist, polished and professional, offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mr. West is expecting you. In the elevator. Emily watched the numbers climb. 30 floors, 40, 52. With every rise, her pulse quickened. She wondered if he was already there, sitting behind a desk the size of her entire apartment, waiting for her to surrender. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and she stepped into a hallway that looked more like an art gallery. White walls, silver frames, silence thick enough to hear her own heartbeat. When she reached the glass office door, she paused. Through it, she could see him standing by the window, his hands in his pockets, the morning light outlining the edges of his suit. He turned before she knocked, as though he'd felt her hesitation. Miss Carter. His voice was the same as last night, calm, precise, carrying a kind of quiet authority that made her spine straighten without thinking. You came. She nodded. I told you I'd think about it. And have you? She looked at him, trying to read the man behind the expression that gave away nothing. I have. He gestured to a seat. She sat. The chair was too soft, the air too still. He moved to his desk and opened a folder, another contract, thicker than the last. "Before we continue," he said, "you should understand what this agreement means. For both of us." His tone was almost gentle, but his eyes were sharp. "I need someone by my side, someone the public will believe I care about." Emily frowned. "Why, you already have money. Power, everything." He exhaled softly, as if the question were too simple to answer. "In my world, perception builds value. Investors trust a man who appears stable, relatable, human." The last word came with a trace of bitterness. "The truth is, Miss Carter, I'm not good at pretending to be any of those things." She studied him. Beneath the perfect suit, the precise movements, there was a weight she couldn't name. "And you think I can fix that? I think you can make them believe I have a heart." For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the city below filled the silence. Emily's throat tightened. "So, you want me to lie to the world for you?" He looked at her steadily. "To protect your brother, and to help me protect a company that employs thousands. Think of it as a performance, one that benefits us both." She wanted to be angry, but what came instead was an ache, half fear, half pity. 6 months, she asked quietly. He nodded. 6 months. During that time, you'll live at my residence. You'll attend social events, charity galas, interviews if necessary. You'll act the part of my fiancé. At the end of the term, the engagement will end publicly, cleanly. Your brother's debt will be erased, and if I refuse halfway through, his gaze didn't waver. Then the contract voids. The debt returns. You already know what that means. Emily's hands curled into fists on her lap. She tried to steady her breath. "You really think you can just buy someone's life like this?" "No," he said softly, "but I can offer you a trade." There was something about the way he said it, not arrogance, but finality, like a man who had long stopped expecting forgiveness. She looked at the paper in front of her, the black ink clear and cold, her name already typed on the last page, waiting for her signature. He slid a pen across the desk. "Take your time," he murmured, but she didn't need time. Every second that passed was another second Daniel didn't have. She reached for the pen, her hand shaking slightly. Before she signed, she looked up at him. "If I do this," she said, "you'll make sure my brother's safe, treated not just alive, but safe." His voice lowered. "I'll see to it personally." Her chest ached with something like relief and fear mixed together. Then she bent down and signed. The sound of the pen against paper was faint, but in that silence, it felt deafening. When it was done, Liam closed the folder, his movements slow, deliberate. "It's official," he said. "From this moment on, the world believes we're engaged." She looked up at him. "And what do you believe?" A flicker passed through his expression, almost like surprise. Then, quietly, he said, "That you've just saved more than you realize." He stood, extending a hand. She hesitated, then took it. His grip was firm, steady, but colder than she expected. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw something shift behind his eyes, some trace of the man he might have been before he learned to hide behind contracts. When he released her hand, she felt the ghost of that touch linger. Outside the tall window, the city glittered in the sunlight, fresh and bright after the storm. But inside that glass room, the air was still heavy. A deal had been made, one neither of them could undo. As Emily turned to leave, he spoke again, his voice low, almost an afterthought. "You'll move in tomorrow. My driver will pick you up at 8. She stopped at the door. 8 sharp, she repeated quietly. 8 sharp, he confirmed. And when the door closed behind her, Liam stood alone for a long time, staring at the signature that now tied their lives together. On her walk back down the long corridor, Emily pressed a hand against her chest, feeling the quiet thud beneath her fingers. Somewhere deep down, beneath the fear and exhaustion, something unfamiliar flickered to life. Not hope, not yet. Just the awareness that her story had shifted course and that from this day forward, nothing she did would truly belong to her alone. Outside, the light hit the wet pavement, scattering in 1,000 directions, like glass broken and remade. The pen had barely left the paper when Emily realized how final it sounded. The ink was still wet, but her choice was already sealed. Liam's words echoed in her mind like a vow she hadn't meant to make. 6 months. My fiancé. Your brother's freedom. It didn't feel real, not yet. Maybe that was why she didn't stand immediately. Maybe that was why her fingers lingered on the edge of the table, trembling, as if holding on to the last moment before everything changed. Liam's gaze followed her quietly. He didn't rush her, didn't speak, only watched, as though he'd seen this kind of surrender before. When she finally rose, the movement felt heavier than it should have. He gestured toward the wide window where the morning light painted thin silver lines across the glass. You understand the terms? He said evenly. I understand, she replied softly. But I need to add my own. His brows lifted slightly, the smallest sign of surprise. Go on. Her voice steadied, though her hands didn't. First she paused, gathering the courage she didn't know she still had. I want to keep my job at the school, the music program. It's the only part of me that's still real. I can't give that up. Liam considered this, his expression unreadable. You'll be under a microscope, Miss Carter. Reporters, investors, social media, they'll watch everything. The schedule won't be kind. Then I'll manage both, she said. Her tone was quiet but firm, the same way she spoke to her students when they doubted themselves. I'm not asking for approval. I'm telling you that it's non-negotiable. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, faintly, a trace of something like respect crossed his face. Fine. You'll keep teaching. She nodded once, the tension in her shoulders easing just a little. Then she took a breath, her next words carrying more weight. The second condition is my brother. He needs help, real help, not just to survive the next few weeks. He needs treatment, rehab, a doctor who actually cares. Liam's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained calm. I can arrange that. Not arrange, she said, her eyes meeting his. Promise. You said you'd see to it personally. For the first time, his expression softened, almost imperceptibly. I did. He moved closer to the window, the light outlining his silhouette against the skyline. You have my word. Daniel will be admitted to the private facility I fund outside Portland. It's quiet, discreet. He'll be safe there. Something in his tone, simple, matter of fact, made her believe him. And that frightened her more than any threat could have. Then those are my terms, she said quietly. He turned back to her. Agreed. A pause lingered. Then, as if sealing something invisible between them, he extended his hand. For a heartbeat, Emily hesitated. The gesture seemed so ordinary, but the space between them carried the weight of everything she was giving up: freedom, anonymity, control. Still, she reached out. Her fingers met his. His hand was warm, steady, and impossibly sure. The handshake lasted only a moment, but when he let go, the room didn't feel the same. Liam closed the folder and placed it aside. Our driver will collect you tomorrow morning, he said. The penthouse staff will prepare a suite for you. You'll find the wardrobe adequate for public events. Emily tried to keep her composure. Wardrobe. You'll need the right image, he replied. People will be watching. She almost smiled at that, an incredulous, tired kind of smile. You really think clothes can make a lie believable? Not the clothes, he said quietly. The conviction. His eyes held hers for a long moment, until she looked away first. The rest of the meeting moved like slow motion. Liam gave instructions to his assistant over the phone, clear, decisive, cold. He talked about contracts, schedules, press appearances. Every word felt foreign, like stepping into a language she hadn't chosen to learn. When it was over, He walked her to the elevator. The hallway seemed longer this time, quieter. At the glass doors, she stopped, unsure what to say. "Thank you," she murmured finally, though she wasn't sure for what. Liam's voice was softer now, almost human. "You don't owe me gratitude, Miss Carter. Just the truth. At least in private." She looked up at him, confusion flickering in her eyes. But before she could answer, the elevator doors opened. He gave a small nod, and she stepped inside. As the doors closed, her reflection overlapped with his. For a fleeting second, two strangers bound by something that felt dangerously close to fate. When she reached the street, the city air hit her like a reminder of everything ordinary she was about to lose. The noise, the smell of coffee from a nearby cart, the laughter of someone rushing past, all of it seemed both too bright and too far away. She pulled her coat tighter and started walking. By the time she reached the small parking lot near her building, the wind had picked up. She paused beside her car, eyes closed, and breathed deeply. The world still turned, her heart still beat. Somewhere, her brother was alive. That was enough for now. But even as she tried to convince herself, she couldn't shake the image of Liam's face, his calm, his certainty, his strange, unyielding presence. There was something in him she couldn't name, something beyond power or arrogance, a loneliness that mirrored her own. She climbed into the driver's seat, resting her forehead against the steering wheel. Her hands still remembered the warmth of his. Outside, a thin drizzle began again, tapping gently on the windshield. She watched it blur the lights into streaks of gold and silver, the world bending and shifting until nothing looked clear anymore. And under that quiet, persistent rain, Emily whispered the words she didn't dare say aloud in his office. "I'll do this for you, Danny. But God help me. I don't know what it'll cost." The city lights flickered in her rearview mirror as she drove away, fading into the dark. In the distance, the tower of glass where Liam West waited glowed faintly against the night sky like a promise. Or maybe a warning. Tomorrow, she would step into that world. But for now, there was only the sound of rain, the hum of the tires on wet asphalt, and the slow, steady rhythm of a heart preparing to break itself for love. The morning began in silence, the kind that feels too clean, too deliberate, like the world has been scrubbed of its edges. When the black sedan pulled up in front of her small apartment, Emily stood by the window for a long moment, her hands tightening around the strap of her worn leather bag. Everything inside that bag, her lesson plans, her brother's photograph, a scarf her mother once knitted, belonged to the life she was leaving behind. Outside, the driver waited by the open door, patient and expressionless. The city was still waking when they pulled away. The streets of Brooklyn were wet from the night's drizzle, reflecting fragments of sky. Emily watched them fade through the glass, her reflection layered over the passing buildings like a ghost caught between two worlds. The car crossed the bridge, the skyline rising ahead, Manhattan glowing like steel and light and promise. The higher the towers reached, the smaller she felt. Liam West's world wasn't just different, it was another planet. By the time the sedan turned into the private drive of the West Tower, her pulse was steady, but her palms were damp. The building itself seemed alive, all glass and silver lines, stretching 60 stories into the morning haze. Security guards nodded as the car approached, their movements precise, choreographed. The doors opened with a soft hiss, revealing a marble lobby where everything gleamed as if it had been polished moments ago. "Good morning, Miss Carter," the concierge said, greeting her by name. His voice was professional, smooth, not a hint of curiosity. She followed the driver to a private elevator, its walls mirrored and silent. When the doors slid shut, the floor number began to climb 30, 40, 50, 59. Her heart beat faster with each passing second. At the top, the elevator opened into a space that took her breath away. The penthouse stretched before her, vast, bright, impossibly still. Glass walls framed the city from every angle. The skyline looked close enough to touch, The air smelled faintly of cedar and something crisp, like rain on stone. "Mr. West will be with you shortly," the driver said before disappearing down the hall. Emily took a tentative step forward. The floors were pale oak, cool beneath her shoes. The furniture was modern, minimal, each piece exactly where it was meant to be. A grand piano sat near the window, black and gleaming, untouched. She wondered if anyone ever played it. A woman appeared from a side corridor, poised, graceful, dressed in black. "Good morning, Miss Carter," she said warmly. "I'm Nora. Mr. West asked me to show you your quarters." Emily followed her down a hallway lined with art that looked too abstract to feel anything. Nora stopped before a tall white door and opened it gently. "This will be your room," she said. Emily stepped inside and stopped. The suite was beautiful, but it felt curated, like a photograph in a magazine. A king-size bed with silk sheets, a small balcony overlooking the river, a dressing table lined with crystal bottles of perfume. Along one wall hung rows of dresses, gowns, and soft satin, blouses in cream and champagne tones. Every item looked new, every tag was still on. "They're all your size," Nora said, her voice even. "Mr. West had them prepared." Emily turned slowly. "How would he even know my size?" "He pays attention," Nora replied simply. That answer lingered long after the woman left. Emily ran her fingers across the fabrics, the smoothness almost strange against her skin. She had never owned anything this fine, not even close. Yet, instead of comfort, what she felt was distance, a life tailored for her, but not hers. She walked out onto the balcony. The wind carried the hum of the city below, horns, footsteps, a siren far away. From up here, everything looked calm, perfect. She thought of the cracked sidewalks near the school, of her students' laughter echoing down the hallway, of her brother's tired smile when she last saw him. They felt a lifetime away. The sound of footsteps drew her back inside. Liam stood in the doorway, his presence quiet but commanding. He wasn't wearing a suit this time, just a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Still, he looked every bit as composed as before. "Is it what you expected?" he asked. Emily shook her head. "No, it's more beautiful." "And emptier?" He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You'll get used to it." "I'm not sure I want to." He smiled faintly, a ghost of amusement crossing his face. "Most people would trade their lives for a view like this." "Then they've never had to live without choice," she said softly. Something flickered in his eyes at that, something brief, almost human. He turned toward the window, his reflection sharp against the glass. "Dinner will be at 7, he said after a pause. "You'll need to attend. We'll go over the public details of our arrangement. Nora will help you with the logistics." Emily nodded, though her stomach tightened at the thought of facing him again over a meal. She wanted to ask him why he was doing all this, why he cared so much about what the world thought of his heart, but the question caught in her throat. When he left, the door clicked softly behind him. The room felt too large again, too quiet. She sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers tracing the seam of the comforter. For a while, she just listened to the hum of the city through the glass. Then, slowly, she reached into her bag and pulled out her brother's photo, the one she always carried. She placed it on the bedside table, beside the perfume bottles. It looked small there, but somehow it made the room a little less foreign. She whispered to the picture, "You're safe now. Danny." "I kept my promise." The city lights began to flicker on outside, one by one, until Manhattan shimmered like a field of stars. She stood by the window again, watching her reflection fade into the glow. This was her new world, polished, distant, cold, and yet, somewhere in its vastness, she sensed a crack. Something in Liam West's perfect order felt unfinished. Maybe it was that untouched piano. Maybe it was the way his eyes lingered on her when she spoke. Emily didn't know yet. But as the night deepened and the city hummed below, she felt it, the quiet pull of two worlds beginning to collide. And when the clock struck 7, She turned toward the door, exhaled once, and whispered under her breath, "All right, then. Let's see what your world really looks like." When Emily stepped into the dining room that evening, she expected to find a table already set by staff silver trays, quiet service, maybe the faint scent of expensive wine. What she didn't expect was the sound of soft jazz and the smell of garlic and thyme drifting from the open kitchen. Liam was there, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a knife in one hand, a pan sizzling behind him. The sight was almost surreal. The man she'd seen command a boardroom with a single look now stood in front of a stove, calm and precise, as if control followed him even here. For a moment, she lingered by the doorway, uncertain. "You cook?" He looked over his shoulder, a faint curve touching the corner of his mouth. "Contrary to popular belief, I am capable of using fire without burning the building down." She almost smiled, almost. The table nearby was simple but elegant white linen, 2 plates, candles flickering in low glass holders. It was too intimate for what they were supposed to be. She hesitated before taking a seat, her pulse unsteady in the quiet. He plated the food himself. Salmon seared to gold, roasted vegetables glistening under a drizzle of oil. "I thought we should eat without cameras," he said. At least for the first time. Emily ran her finger along the edge of the fork, trying to find words. "You didn't have to do all this. I don't do things I don't want to," he said simply, then sat across from her. For a while, they ate in silence. The city stretched beneath them, glowing like a river of stars through the glass. The penthouse lights were dimmed, and the candles softened everything: the walls, their faces, even the distance between them. Emily caught herself studying him, not as the billionaire who owned her brother's debt, but as a man, his movements measured, his posture precise, his eyes occasionally drifting toward the skyline like someone searching for a memory. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. "You're wondering why I asked you." She met his gaze. "I stopped trying to guess. I'm still not sure I understand what you gain from this." He set his glass down, his expression unreadable. "People see what they want to see. In my case, they see money, success, power, but not humanity. That's a liability in my business." He paused, fingers tracing the stem of the glass. "I needed someone real, someone the world would believe I could care about." The words made her chest tighten in a way she didn't expect. "You could have hired anyone," she murmured. He looked at her then, eyes steady. "No, not anyone." Something flickered there, something that felt almost like sincerity. But before she could respond, his gaze shifted, distant again. "There was a time when I thought I didn't have to prove I had a heart. That was before." His voice dropped, roughened slightly at the edges. Emily didn't move, sensing the air change. "Before what?" she asked softly. Liam leaned back, his eyes on the city beyond the glass. The candlelight cast faint shadows across his face. Her name was Victoria Hale. "We built everything together, my first company, the partnerships, the empire they like to talk about in magazines. She was brilliant, ambitious." He paused, the corner of his jaw tightening. "And she was smarter than me when it came to manipulation. I didn't see it until it was too late." Emily listened in silence. She didn't interrupt. "She sold confidential data to our competitors, used my name to sign deals that nearly destroyed us. When I found out, she painted herself as the victim, said I'd driven her away, said I was the one who couldn't love." His mouth curved, but the smile was hollow. "The media believed her, of course. They always do when there's a woman crying and a man who doesn't show it." Emily's fingers stilled against her glass. She wanted to say something, anything, but there was nothing that wouldn't sound inadequate. He went on, voice lower now. "It cost me everything, my credibility, my company, my ability to trust anyone without wondering what they wanted in return." The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that belonged to truth, the kind that lingers after someone shows you a wound they've learned to live with. Emily's eyes softened, and yet, you still built all this again. Liam glanced up. Rebuilding is easier than forgiving. She let that settle between them. For a moment, they just sat there, the hum of the city beneath their feet, the soft glow of candles between them. Finally, she said, maybe that's why you chose me. Because you knew I couldn't hurt you the same way. His gaze met hers again, sharper this time. Or maybe because I thought you could remind me what decency looks like. The words sank deep, somewhere she couldn't quite reach. She looked down at her plate, her appetite gone, but her heart oddly full. The rest of the meal passed quietly. They spoke of smaller things, the music she taught, the places he'd traveled. It was the first time she saw him smile for real, the kind that softened the steel in his eyes. And for the first time, she realized that beneath all the precision, the control, there was a man who didn't know what to do with gentleness when it was offered back to him. When the plates were cleared, Liam stood and moved toward the piano by the window. "You play, don't you?" he asked without turning. "Yes," she said quietly. "Since I was 7. He gestured for her to come closer. "Play something." She hesitated. "It's been a long day. That's why," he said. So she sat. The keys were cool beneath her fingers. She chose something simple, a piece her mother used to hum when the world felt too heavy. The melody rose softly, filling the space, wrapping around the glass and steel like warmth in winter. Liam stood by the window, listening. His reflection caught hers in the glass. 2 silhouettes suspended above the city. When the last note faded, neither spoke. Emily closed the piano lid gently. "You said you needed someone to make people believe you had a heart," she said after a long silence. "But I think the truth is, you just forgot you still do." He turned toward her then, his eyes unreadable, but for the briefest second, she thought she saw something there, a crack in the armor, small but real. The moment hung between them, fragile and fleeting. Then he looked away, his voice quiet. "Good night, Miss Carter. Good night, Mr. West." When she returned to her room, the faint sound of rain began again against the glass. She stood by the window, watching the city breathe below. Somewhere behind her, the piano still held the echo of that last note, a reminder that even in a place built on perfection, something human had begun to stir. And in that silence, Emily understood sometimes. It's not love that begins things. It's empathy, the smallest, softest crack in the ice. The days that followed unfolded slowly, like soft light filtering through morning fog. Emily began to learn the rhythm of the penthouse, the hum of quiet efficiency, the way the sun poured through the wide glass each dawn, the faint scent of freshly ground coffee that drifted from the kitchen before anyone spoke a word. Life there had a strange kind of calm, polished and deliberate, and though it should have felt like a cage, it didn't. Not completely. Every morning, she would wake before the city fully stirred and step onto the balcony, letting the chill wind press against her skin. Below her, Manhattan pulsed horns, footsteps, 1,000 lives beginning at once. Up here, it was still, silent, a world apart. Liam rarely joined her for breakfast, but somehow, her cup was always there before she arrived, black coffee with a single teaspoon of sugar. She never told him how she liked it, yet he knew. At first, she thought it was coincidence. Then, one morning, she noticed the small note beside the cup. "You prefer 1 sugar, not 2. I asked Nora to stop guessing. She couldn't help but smile. Their lives began to intertwine in the quietest ways. He worked from his office down the hall, often until midnight, and she taught her students over video calls from the study he'd arranged for her, complete with a new piano, though she still missed the one that smelled faintly of her mother's perfume. The children's laughter through the screen filled the penthouse with something it had clearly been missing. Once, passing by, Liam paused at the door just long enough to listen. He didn't step inside, but she saw his reflection linger in the glass. At dinner, he was often quiet, but not distant. The conversation had a new ease, as if the silence between them had softened. He asked about her students, how many were preparing for their recital, whether the youngest still mixed up her left hand from her right. It wasn't small talk. He listened. Every detail she mentioned seemed to settle somewhere behind those steady gray eyes. One evening, after another long day, she found him in the kitchen again. No chef, no staff, just him, standing over a pan of something that smelled faintly of rosemary and butter. "You cook more than I expected," she said, her voice light, teasing. He didn't look up. "It's not about cooking, it's about control." She tilted her head. "Control over what? Chaos," he said simply, setting the pan aside. "In the kitchen, ingredients obey. Out there, people don't." She watched him for a moment, unsure whether to feel sorry or impressed. "Maybe that's why you built walls made of glass," she said softly. He glanced at her then, and the corner of his mouth lifted just slightly. Maybe. There was a gentleness in that moment, one that slipped between words. She didn't recognize it for what it was until later, the way he let himself relax, the way she stopped measuring her own silence. Days blurred into weeks. The world outside continued as always, but inside those glass walls, time seemed to move differently. Emily found herself adjusting without realizing it. She no longer flinched when his footsteps echoed through the hall, no longer hesitated before speaking. He wasn't kind, exactly, but he was steady. And sometimes, in the quiet, steadiness was enough. One evening, a storm rolled across the city. Lightning flashed behind the skyline, and thunder rattled the windows like a heartbeat too close. Emily stood by the piano, watching the rain streak down the glass. Liam appeared beside her, his presence so quiet she didn't notice until he spoke. "You hate storms I used to," she said. "When I was little, my brother would count between the thunderclaps to keep me calm. 1, 2, 3. He said if we reached 10 before the next one, it meant we were safe." Liam nodded slowly. "And were you?" She smiled faintly. "Not always, but I believed him." He looked out at the rain, the city shimmering beneath it. "Belief can be a dangerous thing," he murmured, "or the only thing that keeps you from falling apart," she countered. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the sound of thunder seemed far away. When the lights flickered, she laughed quietly, startled. "I didn't think a place like this could lose power." He smiled, really smiled this time, and the sight of it startled her more than the lightning. Even towers like this have weak spots. It was a small moment, ordinary, but something in it stayed with her long after he left the room. In the days that followed, she began to notice the subtle ways he changed, how he paused before speaking to her, softer somehow, how he passed her the newspaper with the crossword half filled his handwriting, careful, almost human, how he'd leave a single lily in the vase on the kitchen counter, always white, always fresh. He never mentioned them, and she never asked. But each gesture whispered of a man who was remembering something, maybe what it meant to care, maybe what it meant to be seen. At night, when the city lights shimmered across the floor and the piano sat waiting by the window, Emily would play, quiet pieces, nothing grand. She didn't know if he listened, but sometimes she thought she heard footsteps stop outside her door. And slowly, she realized the truth the longer she stayed, the less the penthouse felt like a prison. It was still too big, too bright, too far from the world she knew, but it was changing. Or maybe she was. On the morning she caught him making coffee black. 1 sugar, hers already poured. She stood in the doorway and said softly, "You're getting good at this." He didn't turn around. "At what?" "At pretending you don't care when you do." Liam froze for a fraction of a second, the kind of stillness that speaks louder than words. Then he poured his coffee and said, almost lightly, "Care is overrated, Miss Carter." She smiled. "You keep telling yourself that." He didn't answer, but she caught the smallest hint of amusement in his eyes as he handed her the cup. Outside, the city glowed beneath a pale spring sun. The world kept moving, unaware that in a penthouse high above it, 2 people from different worlds were slowly, almost unwillingly beginning to soften toward each other. and as Emily stepped onto the balcony, coffee warm in her hands, she thought maybe peace doesn't always arrive in quiet places. Sometimes, it begins in the spaces between two silences where something frozen starts, almost imperceptibly, to melt. The night of the gala shimmered like a dream she wasn't sure she belonged in. The ballroom was vast, alive with the glitter of chandeliers and the low hum of 100 polished conversations. Every detail sparkled: the crystal glasses, the soft gold of the table settings, the pale arrangements of lilies that filled the air with a faint, sweet scent. Outside, the city glowed through the glass walls like a sea of light, but inside, the world felt closer, warmer, almost unreal. Emily stood near the edge of it all, dressed in midnight blue. The gown had been chosen for her, tailored perfectly, though she still tugged at the sleeves as if to make it more hers. Her hair, loosely swept back, caught the light each time she turned. For the first time since she'd come to this new life, people looked at her and saw elegance, not the quiet music teacher from Oregon, but someone who belonged here, or at least looked like she did. Across the room, Liam was surrounded by investors and board members, all leaning in with that same mix of reverence and fear. Yet, even in the center of that orbit, his gaze found her through the crowd. A brief nod, almost imperceptible, but enough. He crossed the room a few minutes later, his presence quiet but commanding. "You're doing fine," he said under his breath. "I haven't done anything yet," she murmured, glancing at the stage. "You showed up. That's more than most people ever do." Before she could reply, the host of the evening, a woman in pearls and confidence, approached, all smiles. "Mr. West, Miss Carter." She greeted warmly. "It's time." Liam turned to Emily. "They'll introduce you after me. Just speak from your heart. You'll know what to say." Her pulse stuttered. "What if I don't?" He smiled slightly, eyes softer than usual. "You will." Then he stepped onto the stage, the crowd falling instantly silent. His voice, calm and resonant, carried easily through the hall as he spoke of innovation, of philanthropy, of giving back. The audience listened, admiring, respectful, but when he gestured for Emily to join him, a different kind of silence followed the expectant kind. She walked slowly, careful not to trip on the hem of her gown, her heart hammering. The lights felt too bright, the air too thin. Liam stepped aside, his hand brushing briefly against hers as she took her place at the podium. That small touch steadied her more than she wanted to admit. She looked out over the crowd faces framed in soft gold light, polite smiles, the faint clinking of glasses. She drew a quiet breath. "Good evening," she began, her voice trembling just once before settling. "I'm not someone used to standing in rooms like this. Most days, I stand in front of a piano with children who still believe the world will listen if they just play loud enough." A few soft laughs rippled through the room. She went on, "Music has a way of finding what's broken and making it beautiful again. That's what art does. It takes pain and turns it into something that reminds us we're still alive." Her gaze flicked toward Liam. "Just for a heartbeat. When you support programs like this, you're not just funding talent. You're giving children, some who've lost more than they should, the chance to believe their voices matter." The room grew still. Even the waiters paused at the edges. Emily continued, her tone steady, quiet, but full. "Not every child will grow up to play in an orchestra, but maybe they'll remember that feeling the moment their music filled a room and someone listened. Sometimes, that's enough to save a life." When she finished, there was a beat of silence. Then, applause, soft at first, then rising, warm and genuine. Liam watched her, expression unreadable, but something in his eyes had changed. The sharpness he always carried was gone, replaced by something he didn't try to hide: pride. Real, unguarded pride. When she returned to her seat, the host leaned close, whispering, "You have a gift, my dear." That was beautiful. Emily smiled politely, her hands still trembling under the tablecloth. Liam leaned slightly toward her. You didn't tell me you could do that. Do what make people feel? She met his gaze. You didn't ask. He laughed quietly, a sound she hadn't heard from him before. It was soft, almost surprised, and it made her chest ache in a way she couldn't quite explain. As the evening wore on, more people approached her, donors, reporters, artists, all wanting to shake her hand, to thank her for reminding them why the gala existed in the first place. Liam stayed close, speaking when needed, but mostly letting her shine. It was strange he had built this empire, this night, but for once, he seemed content to stand in the background, watching, listening. Later, as the orchestra played a slow waltz, he offered her his hand. Just for the cameras, he said, though the room wasn't watching anymore. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. His hand was warm, steady, familiar now. They moved together easily, the rhythm slow, measured, the music wrapped around them, a melody she half remembered from another life. Do you ever miss it? She asked quietly. Miss what? The person you were before everything turned into. This. He was silent for a moment, then said, Sometimes, but I don't think he'd fit here anymore. She studied him, his profile sharp against the light. Maybe he would, if someone reminded him how. He looked down at her then, eyes softer, almost searching. Maybe. The dance ended. The applause returned. And for the first time since they'd met, he didn't seem like the man who had bought her brother's debt, or the one who commanded the world from his glass tower. He was just a man, standing in the half-light, watching her as though she were something he hadn't realized he'd been missing. When they finally left the ballroom, the city was quiet again. The driver opened the car door, but Emily lingered on the steps, looking up at the night sky. Liam joined her, his voice low. You were extraordinary tonight. She smiled faintly. I was just honest. Exactly, he said. That's something this world doesn't know what to do with. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he added, barely above a whisper, You make it look easy. Emily turned toward him, her heart still echoing with the music. Maybe it's not supposed to be easy. He didn't answer, but as he opened the car door for her, his hand brushed hers again this time, longer, lingering, deliberate. And as the city lights stretched across the windshield on the drive home, Emily looked out at the skyline and thought, for the first time, that maybe this strange, gilded life was leading her somewhere she hadn't expected, somewhere she might actually want to go. But deep down, a quieter thought followed her into the night, one she couldn't yet name, because sometimes the moments that change everything don't come with noise or clarity. They come wrapped in stillness, in the soft hum of music, in a single look across a crowded room that says something's beginning. The morning after the gala felt strangely quiet. The city moved as it always did, cars humming below, sunlight spilling across the skyline, but inside the penthouse. The air carried a new kind of stillness. Emily stood by the window, her coffee warm between her hands, thinking of the night before the music, the applause, the way Liam had looked at her as if he was seeing her for the first time. Something had shifted between them. She could feel it, even in the silence. When Liam finally appeared from his study, he seemed lighter somehow. His tie hung loose, his sleeves rolled, but there was a hint of calm in the sharpness of his gaze. Morning, he said simply. Morning, she replied. He poured himself coffee, glanced at her briefly, and added, You were remarkable last night. She smiled, a little shyly. I didn't know if anyone was even listening. They were, he said. I was. The words hung in the air, quiet but heavy with meaning. Before she could respond, the elevator chimed a soft, polite sound that somehow felt like a warning. Liam frowned slightly. I wasn't expecting anyone. A moment later, the doors opened, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The woman who stepped out was the kind who didn't have to announce herself. She carried confidence like perfume, sharp, expensive, unmistakable. Her hair was the color of champagne, her heels clicked with precision, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. Liam, she said, her voice smooth as glass. You look well, Victoria, he said, his tone cool. Emily felt her pulse quicken. The name struck something, a name she'd heard only once, softly, in the glow of candlelight. The woman who had left scars behind. Victoria's eyes turned toward her, assessing. And you must be the fiancé, she said, the word laced with mockery. The world has been dying to meet you. Emily straightened slightly, not out of pride, but instinct. And you must be the woman who taught it to doubt him, she replied softly. Victoria's smile froze. Just a fraction. Sharp, she murmured. How refreshing. Liam stepped forward. Why are you here? Victoria. She turned her gaze back to him, voice dripping with false sweetness. Relax. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because West Technologies just made a move on one of my companies, and I thought it would be civilized to discuss it in person. Her eyes flicked to Emily again. Though I see you've traded business meetings for dinner parties. Emily didn't flinch. I suppose it's easier to negotiate when you're not hiding behind a lawsuit. The faintest edge of surprise crossed Victoria's face. Then, for the first time, she laughed low and dangerous. He taught you well, she said. Emily met her gaze calmly. I've learned to listen. The air between them was electric, the kind of tension that needed no raised voices. Liam said nothing, watching the exchange with a quiet intensity. He didn't interfere. He didn't need to. Finally, Victoria turned back to him. You've changed, she said softly. The Liam I knew wouldn't have let anyone else speak for him. The Liam you knew didn't trust anyone enough to let them try, he said. Her expression flickered, then hardened. Careful, she said. You're starting to sound human. She smiled one last time at Emily, a smile that carried both envy and disbelief, then turned toward the elevator. Enjoy the view, sweetheart, she said over her shoulder. Just remember, it's a long way down. The doors slid shut behind her with a muted chime. Silence settled again, thick and fragile. Emily let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She's exactly what I imagined. Liam rubbed a hand over his face, the weight of old ghosts visible in his posture. She's worse, he said quietly. Emily hesitated. You didn't tell me she was back in New York. I didn't know, he admitted. But she won't stay quiet for long. She never does. He turned toward her then, eyes unreadable. You handled her well. She gave a small shrug. She underestimated me. That's all. A ghost of a smile tugged at his lips. Most people do. Their eyes met. And something passed between them, something unspoken but deeply understood. Later that afternoon, while Liam disappeared into back-to-back calls, Emily sat by the piano, her fingers drifting over the keys. The melody that came was uncertain, wandering, full of pauses. She thought about the look in Victoria's eyes, not just anger, but something else. Pity, maybe, or jealousy. It wasn't clear. When she finished, she looked up to find Liam standing in the doorway. He'd been listening. She won't hurt you, he said quietly. I won't let her. Emily shook her head. I'm not afraid of her. He studied her, then nodded slowly. No, you're not. For a long moment, neither spoke. The city outside glowed gold against the glass, and in the reflection, their two silhouettes stood side by side, different, yet somehow aligned. You know, she said softly, if she's the one who broke you, she's not the one who gets to define who you are now. Liam's expression shifted, something unguarded flashing in his eyes. You talk like you believe people can be fixed. I don't, she said, but I believe they can change. He looked at her for a long time, as if weighing the truth in her words. You really don't belong in this world, do you? Maybe not, she said, but maybe that's why I'm here. He exhaled quietly, a sound that almost resembled a laugh. Careful. Emily, "You're starting to sound like someone who matters." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I do." That night, long after the city lights had dimmed, Emily sat again by the window. The encounter with Victoria replayed in her mind the way the woman's voice had tried to cut her, the way Liam's silence had stood like a shield beside her. And for the first time, she realized he hadn't needed to defend her. He'd simply seen her strong, steady, unshaken, somewhere deep down, behind all his walls. Something had shifted, and though she couldn't name it yet, she knew this much: the past had returned. But it hadn't come to destroy her. It had come to show Liam what he'd almost lost. The night stretched quiet around them. In the reflection of the glass, Emily caught a glimpse of her own face, calm, resolute, no longer the woman who'd once begged in the rain for mercy. Somewhere behind her, she heard footsteps pause. Liam's voice, soft and certain, broke the silence. "You were extraordinary today." She turned slightly, meeting his eyes in the reflection. "I was just myself." He smiled, tired, genuine, something rare. That's what scares them the most. And in that fragile stillness, where power and vulnerability met, Emily felt it again, the quiet, undeniable truth that something between them was changing, irrevocably. Nights in the penthouse had begun to stretch longer, softer. The kind of nights that didn't need words, just the quiet hum of the city below, the sound of rain tapping gently against glass, and the space between two people learning how to breathe in the same rhythm. Emily had stopped counting the days of their contract. Time had lost its edges, blending into small, unguarded moments, a shared cup of coffee gone cold between meetings, the faint brush of his hand as he passed her a file, the warmth of laughter that escaped them both when neither expected it. Something was shifting, not with thunder, but like the tide, steady, certain, impossible to ignore. One night, she found him in the living room, surrounded by documents and blueprints. The lights were dim, the city casting reflections across the glass table. He looked tired, his tie loose, his hair slightly disheveled, but there was a gentleness in the exhaustion, something she hadn't seen before. "You're still working?" she said quietly, leaning against the doorway. He didn't look up at first. "Deadlines don't care about the hour. Neither does loneliness," she murmured. That made him glance up. Their eyes met across the room, the space between them thick with things unsaid. "Do you get lonely, Emily?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes, but not in the way people think. It's not about being alone. It's about being unseen." He studied her face, his expression unreadable. "I know that feeling." The words landed gently, but they lingered. She moved closer, stopping just beside his chair. The air smelled faintly of ink and cedar. "Then maybe," she said softly, "we don't have to pretend we don't." He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly, a smile that reached his eyes this time. "You're not supposed to make this easy for me." "Who said I was trying to?" For a moment, silence filled the room again. But it wasn't empty. It was full. Over the next few weeks, the distance between them continued to shrink. Sometimes it was small, a shared glance over breakfast, the sound of his footsteps pausing by the piano when she played. Sometimes it was quiet conversation late at night, both of them barefoot, sitting on opposite ends of the couch with the city glowing beneath their feet. He told her things he hadn't told anyone, about the nights he couldn't sleep, about the weight of building an empire and realizing it meant nothing if no one stood beside him. She didn't offer advice. She just listened. And somehow, that was enough. In return, he learned her silences. He could tell when her thoughts drifted to her brother or to her students back home. Once, she caught him leaving an envelope on her desk, an anonymous donation to the school's music program. When she looked up at him, he only said, "Don't thank me." It wasn't charity, it was overdue. Their walls were coming down, one gesture at a time. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something truer, a quiet recognition, a shared space where both could exist without masks. One evening, after dinner, Liam stood by the window, watching lightning flicker in the distance. Emily joined him, her reflection merging with his in the glass. "Storm's coming," she said softly. He nodded. "It always does." She glanced at him, her voice a whisper. "You don't have to brace for everyone." He turned to her then, and for a heartbeat, the world outside disappeared. His eyes softened, the steel fading into something vulnerable. He lifted a hand, almost without thinking, and brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was light, barely there, but it felt like the ground shifting beneath her feet. Her breath caught. "Emily," he began, his voice low, rough around the edges, but she shook her head gently. "Don't," she whispered. "Not yet." He nodded slowly, stepping back, but his eyes stayed on hers, full of something neither of them had the courage to name. That night, neither slept. He stayed in his study, pacing, restless. She sat by the piano, fingers tracing the keys but never pressing them. Between them, the city kept breathing, unaware of the two hearts learning to sync to its rhythm. In the morning, nothing had changed, and yet everything had. When she walked into the kitchen, he was already there, coffee ready, the same way he always made it. But when their hands brushed as she reached for the cup, neither of them pulled away. The silence that followed wasn't awkward anymore. It was electric. Later that week, they attended another business dinner, this time smaller, just a few close partners, candlelight reflecting off polished wood. When someone asked how they'd met, Liam's eyes flicked to hers, and without hesitation, he said, "By accident. The best one I've had." Emily didn't look away. She didn't have to. It was after midnight when they returned home. The city below was quiet, blanketed in soft fog. She started toward her room, but his voice stopped her. "Emily," he said. She turned. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, eyes steady but uncertain. This thing between us, it wasn't supposed to happen. She gave a small, knowing smile. Most real things aren't. He exhaled slowly, almost a laugh, but not quite. "You make me forget who I am when I'm around you." She stepped closer until she could see her reflection in his eyes. Maybe that's the point. For a long moment, they stood there, close enough to feel each other's breath, but neither moved. The air between them was fragile, sacred. And then, softly, almost reverently, he reached out, his hand found hers. No pretense, no contract, just skin against skin, the quiet acknowledgement of something that had been waiting to happen. Emily didn't pull away. She just whispered, "Liam." He looked at her like a man seeing sunlight after years of night. And in that silence, filled with the pulse of the city and the faint hum of their own hearts, the truth finally settled between them. What began as an arrangement had become something real. No promises yet, no declarations. Just the quiet certainty that the lie they built had somehow turned into the most honest thing they'd ever known. Outside, the storm broke, rain streaking the windows like silver threads. Inside, neither spoke, but both knew that something fragile had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The night was quieter than usual, as if even the city below had stopped to breathe. Rain traced soft lines down the tall windows, silver threads against the dark. Emily sat by the piano, her hands resting on the keys but not pressing them. The melody in her mind was too fragile for sound. Somewhere behind her, she could hear Liam pacing steady, deliberate, like a man caught between restraint and confession. It had been days since that night they stood too close, since that touch that felt like a promise neither dared to name. Nothing had been said since, nothing had to be, yet silence, when filled with emotion, becomes its own kind of weight. "Can't sleep?" she asked without turning. He stopped. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, his voice came low, roughened at the edges. "No, not lately." She turned slightly. The dim light from the hallway caught his face, tired, shadowed, but softer than she'd ever seen it. "You're thinking about the company again?" He shook his head. "No, for once, I'm not." He came closer, his footsteps soundless on the polished floor. "You play when you can't sleep," he said quietly. She nodded. "It helps." He watched her for a while, his eyes following the slow rhythm of her hands on the ivory keys. "Play something," he said. "Anything." She hesitated, then began to play not a full song, just fragments of one, gentle, uncertain, full of pauses, the kind of music that felt more like breathing than performing. When she looked up, his gaze hadn't left her. "It's beautiful," he murmured. "It's unfinished," she said. "So, are most things worth keeping?" The words made her pause. Her fingers stilled. She looked at him, searching his face for what he meant, but there was something raw in his eyes, something she'd never seen there before. "Liam," he stepped closer, until the air between them felt charged. "I've tried to keep this simple," he said, "to keep it professional, logical, but I can't anymore." Her heartbeat stumbled. "What are you saying?" He exhaled, as if the truth had been waiting too long. "You make me remember who I was before all of this. Before money, before headlines, before I started measuring my worth in numbers and losses." He took another step forward, his voice quieter now. "You make me remember that I used to believe in things, in people, in love." Emily's throat tightened. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. The rain outside grew louder, as if it were trying to fill the silence between them. "I wasn't supposed to feel anything for you," he said. "That wasn't part of the deal, but I do." Her breath caught. "Liam, I can't fake this anymore," he whispered. "Not with you." There was something in his tone, something stripped of all the arrogance, all the armor, a kind of naked honesty that left her defenseless. She stood slowly, the piano still vibrating faintly behind her. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air felt thick, trembling. Then, softly, she said, "You don't have to." He looked at her as if he hadn't expected that answer. His eyes darkened, uncertain. "Emily, if I cross this line, there's no going back." She took one step closer until her voice was barely a whisper. "Maybe that's exactly what we need." The next moment unfolded in silence. He reached for her, slowly at first, as if asking for permission without words. She didn't move away. His hand brushed against her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. Her breath trembled. When she looked up, her eyes met his, and everything else contracts. Promises, fear fell away. Then, she kissed him. It wasn't careful or rehearsed. It was real deep, aching, the kind of kiss that unravels all the walls you've built. For a moment, she felt the world tilt beneath her feet. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Liam's forehead rested against hers, his voice low and unsteady. "Tell me this isn't a mistake." She smiled faintly, her voice barely audible. "If it is, I don't care." He closed his eyes. "You don't understand. You could lose everything because of me." "I already did," she whispered. "But maybe what I found is worth more." He laughed softly. The sound caught between wonder and disbelief. Then he kissed her again, gentler this time, slower, as if memorizing the moment. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far away. Inside, the storm had already begun. Later, they sat by the window. The city stretched endlessly below. He held her hand, his thumb tracing idle circles against her skin. "When did this happen?" she asked quietly. He smiled. "Somewhere between the first lie and the first truth." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "And what happens now, I don't know," he admitted. "But for the first time in years, I'm not afraid to find out." The night deepened, wrapping them in its quiet. There were no more words, no contracts, just the sound of rain, the warmth of skin against skin, and the realization that something in both of them had changed forever. Long after he fell asleep, Emily stayed awake, watching the city lights flicker. She thought about how easily lines could blur between duty and desire, between what was real and what was supposed to be pretend. And yet, as she listened to his breathing beside her, steady and human, she knew there was no pretending left. What they had started was no longer a deal sealed by desperation. It was something deeper, something fragile, something dangerous. Because when hearts learn to believe again, they forget to be careful. And somewhere in that quiet penthouse, where two broken souls had once agreed to lie, love had quietly found its way in. Dawn came softly over Manhattan, the first light of day spilling across the glass towers and casting a pale glow into the penthouse. Emily lay still in the bed, the sheets twisted around her heartbeat slow but insistent. The city hummed below, distant and indifferent. But inside this room, the quiet carried weight, the kind that comes after a night where walls were lowered and truths were whispered. Liam stirred beside her, the early sun outlining the sharp lines of his face, softening them in the warmth. He reached out, fingers brushing her shoulder, a touch both tender and tentative. "Morning," he murmured, voice rough with sleep. She turned to him, eyes still heavy. "Morning," she whispered back, the word barely leaving her lips. For a moment, they didn't speak. Neither needed to. The space between them had changed. What had started as a contract, a mutual necessity, had transformed in the quiet intimacy of midnight into something real, something fragile. He shifted closer, his forehead resting against hers. "Emily," his voice broke slightly. "I can't pretend anymore. I don't want to. Not with you." Her chest tightened. She had feared this, his closeness, the honesty, but also longed for it. "Liam," she whispered, unsure of how to name the storm brewing in her heart. "I'm serious," he said, eyes searching hers. "I want more than a contract. I want you, truly, entirely." The words, simple yet heavy, made her pulse quicken. The thrill of possibility tangled with the fear she had carried for years. To love someone like Liam West, powerful, untouchable, was to risk everything. And yet, standing there, she felt a gravity pulling her toward him that she could no longer resist. I don't know if I can," she admitted, voice barely audible. "I've been hurt before." "I can't, Emily," he interrupted gently. "I don't want to hurt you, not intentionally, but I can't lie. Not to you, not to myself. I've waited too long to feel this. Alive." Her breath caught. She wanted to reach for him, to close the distance between fear and desire, but something in her chest kept her still. "And if we fall, then we'll fall together," he whispered, his hands lifting to cradle her face. "But I'd rather risk it than live a life pretending we aren't here, pretending we don't feel this." Her lips parted, caught between words and a need she could no longer deny. She leaned forward, closing the gap between them, and kissed him. The kiss was soft at first, testing, then deepening as the layers of restraint melted away. Every fear, every hesitation, every contract they had signed seemed to dissolve with it. When they broke apart, both were breathless, and for a moment, all that existed was the steady thrum of their hearts in tandem. "I love you," Liam said quietly, the words fragile, almost uncertain, but entirely true. Emily's eyes glistened. I think I love you too." The confession hung in the room, more potent than any agreement, more binding than any contract. Outside, the city roared to life, oblivious to the small revolution that had just occurred in the penthouse. Rain clouds from the previous night had dispersed, leaving the streets wet and glimmering. Sunlight reflected off the skyscrapers, painting the city gold, and in the quiet corner of the world they had carved. Two hearts had finally acknowledged what had been growing in silence. For the rest of the morning, they moved cautiously, hands brushing, glances lingering longer than necessary. Every touch carried a weight of discovery. Every smile, a quiet acknowledgement that the rules they had lived by no longer applied. Liam poured them both coffee, his hands steady, but his gaze soft. "We're in uncharted territory now," he said. Emily smiled, leaning against the counter. "We've been in that territory for weeks, maybe months. I just didn't know it yet." He laughed softly, a sound that made the space between them warmer. Then it seems we've been late to our own beginning. She sipped her coffee, the warmth spreading through her, grounding her to the moment. Better late than never, she whispered. Throughout the day, the penthouse felt different. The sunlight streaming through the windows no longer highlighted its cold perfection. It now reflected something more human: shared space, shared vulnerability, and the quiet promise that, despite fear, they would navigate this together. By evening, when the city lights flickered on and the streets below shimmered with 1,000 reflections, they found themselves on the balcony. Liam's arm was around her, her head resting against his chest, listening to the pulse of the city and the rhythm of his heartbeat. "Are we ready for this?" she asked softly. "For what? To step beyond the contract? To really be us?" He kissed her hair, a gentle, reassuring touch. "We're already there. The world doesn't have to know. Not yet. All that matters is here, now, together." She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his presence chase away the lingering fear. "Together," she repeated, and in that quiet dawn, with the city sprawling endlessly beneath them, they understood the truth. Love had come, not safely, not without risk, but undeniably. They had no roadmap, no guarantees, only each other. And that was enough. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is let go of fear and let your heart lead the way. Outside, Manhattan shimmered, indifferent to the choices made above. But inside, in the penthouse, Emily and Liam had crossed a line they could never uncross. And for the first time, both of them were willing to see where it might take them. The drive to the West family estate was quiet, the kind of quiet that carried weight in every mile. Emily sat beside Liam in the black SUV, hands clasped lightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the blurred skyline slipping past. She had met powerful people before: donors, patrons, and the occasional city official, but nothing had prepared her for this. Not the kind of authority that lingered in the room like a physical presence, demanding obedience, measuring worth in silence. When they arrived, the gates opened with a muted hiss. The estate stretched before her stone facades, manicured gardens, fountains that glittered even under the dim morning sun. The world here seemed flawless, untouchable, and cold. Liam stepped out first, tall and sure, his posture firm yet relaxed. Emily followed, small in his shadow, wondering what kind of man awaited inside. The butler guided them through halls lined with portraits of stern faces, each one seeming to judge her with quiet accusation. Finally, they stopped at a large mahogany door. Liam paused, hand resting lightly on the knob. He turned to her, eyes serious. "Ready?" Emily nodded, swallowing the sudden lump in her throat. "I'll try." Liam opened the door. Inside, the study smelled of old books and leather, heavy with the authority that radiated from the man behind the desk. He rose to greet them, a tall figure, impeccably dressed, eyes sharp and calculating. The way he looked at Liam made Emily feel the weight of history itself pressing down. "Father," Liam said, voice steady, though Emily could sense a restrained tension in the air. "Liam," the older man said, cold, measured. His eyes flicked toward Emily, brief but cutting. "And you must be the girl keeping my son distracted from real work." Emily felt her chest tighten. She had heard stories about men like this, men who saw charm and intelligence as trivial unless they served a purpose. But she didn't step back. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly, holding his gaze. "I'm here because I care about him," she said simply, "and because I respect him." Her words drew a faint crease between his brows. "Respect. That's a luxury in my world." Emily didn't falter. "Respect is not a luxury. It's necessary, especially for someone who matters to you." For a long moment, the older man studied her, the silence stretching between them like taut wire. Liam shifted beside her, hand brushing hers subtly, grounding her in the quiet courage that had brought her this far. You think you can teach him something? The elder man asked finally, his voice sharp. I don't need to teach, she replied calmly. I just need to stand beside him when it matters. That's all any person should ever ask. The tension in the room broke slightly, not with concession, but with recognition. The elder man regarded her anew, a flicker of curiosity mixed with grudging respect. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Liam looked at her then, eyes softening in a way that made her chest ache. In his glance, she saw relief, admiration, and something more fragile, trust. She realized in that moment she was no longer just a presence in his life. She had become someone who could hold space for him, for all that he carried, without fear or hesitation. You've changed him, the elder said quietly, almost to himself, or perhaps, you're the only one who ever could. Emily felt Liam's hand tighten around hers. He's not easy, she whispered softly. No, Liam said, his voice low, intimate. But you make it feel possible. The older man regarded them both, and for the first time, Emily saw the steel behind his authority flicker, not gone, not softened entirely, but something had shifted, the presence that had seemed impenetrable, indifferent, even cruel, now acknowledged her courage. Very well, he said after a pause. I see why he cares. That will have to do for now. Emily exhaled slowly, relief washing over her, but she didn't relax entirely. Liam turned toward her, his eyes brimming with something she couldn't name: pride, awe, a deep gratitude. You have no idea what you just did, he murmured. I protected you, she said simply, as anyone should. No, he corrected gently, his hand brushing hers again. You saved me from them, from doubt, from myself. For a moment, they stood there, a quiet alignment forming between them, two people who had crossed a threshold together, strengthened by courage and trust. Emily realized that in facing his father, she had stepped into a world of scrutiny and power, and yet she hadn't faltered. That act, small and resolute, had illuminated something Liam had long forgotten: hope, and the possibility of unconditional support. Later, as they left the estate, the morning sun glinting off the gates, Liam's hand found hers. You were remarkable, he said quietly. Emily smiled faintly, brushing the words aside, though her heart raced. I was just honest. He stopped walking, turning toward her, eyes locked on hers. Honesty like that, it's rare, and in a world like mine, it feels like light. She felt her chest tighten, knowing he meant it. Not the glow of attraction, not the shallow thrill of proximity, but something deeper: recognition, reverence, and a bond forged not in convenience, but in courage. Then let's keep it, he said softly, squeezing her hand. The light, just you and me. Emily nodded. Just us. The city stretched before them, sprawling and indifferent, but in the penthouse and in Liam's presence, Emily felt a warmth she hadn't known she could carry. In defending him, she had earned more than respect. She had become the person Liam saw as his constant, his anchor, the light he never knew he needed. And for the first time, she realized that even in a world dominated by power and control, bravery and truth could carve a place for love to flourish. As they drove back through the awakening streets, hand in hand, Emily felt a quiet certainty settle within her together. They could face anything, even ghosts, even kings of their own empires, even fear. Because sometimes, courage doesn't roar, it glows, small and unwavering, and that glow can change everything. The morning broke with a quiet unease. Emily had barely touched her coffee, the aroma failing to settle the tension that had tightened around her chest overnight. Her phone buzzed incessantly: alerts, messages, social media notifications, and each one seemed worse than the last. Screens filled with headlines: Billionaire's fiancé or paid actor West's secret deal. Exposed, and Emily Carter, the woman behind the contract. Her hands shook slightly as she scrolled, each article a fresh reminder of Victoria's reach and malice. The photographs were candid, staged perfectly to mislead, casting Emily as the woman who had been bought, not loved. Laughter from strangers, judgment from strangers, all pressing down like 1,000 tiny hands. She felt the weight of humiliation keenly. The penthouse, once a sanctuary, now seemed confining, the city below indifferent. Every passerby's glance imagined through the lens of media scrutiny. Her chest tightened, a silent plea that this nightmare would end. Liam appeared in the doorway, calm but intense, as though he had stepped out of the storm fully formed. "I saw it," he said simply, eyes scanning the headlines with an expression she could not read entirely. Emily swallowed hard. "It's everywhere. People. They think what they want." Liam interrupted, voice steady. "But that doesn't matter. Not to us." She looked at him. Disbelief mingled with fear. "Not everyone sees it your way." He moved closer, hand brushing hers lightly. "Then we'll show them. Not with words whispered in the dark, but with truth, bold, public, and undeniable." Emily blinked. "What do you mean?" "You know me," he said quietly, leaning against the edge of the kitchen counter. "When someone tries to tear down what matters, I don't wait, I act. And I never back down." Her gaze softened, tinged with admiration and a hint of apprehension. "And what matters right now is us," he finished for her, voice low, determined. "Everything else is noise." Hours later, they arrived at the press conference. The room hummed with anticipation, reporters crowding with cameras, recorders, flashes illuminating every corner. Emily's stomach twisted, but Liam's presence beside her steadied her. He didn't speak to the room, only offered a small squeeze of her hand, a silent promise that she was not alone. The microphones clicked, and the room went quiet. Liam stepped forward, every movement precise, commanding. The world had expected a corporate denial, a carefully worded deflection. What they did not expect was the raw truth he was about to give. He took a deep breath, eyes scanning the crowd, before speaking clearly and calmly. "Ladies and gentlemen, the story you've seen is partially true. I did engage Emily Carter in an arrangement, but it was never about money. It was never about appearances. It was about someone who, in the darkest moments, became the light in my life." Emily's heart pounded. Her cheeks warmed as the room absorbed his words. Some reporters blinked, confused. Others leaned forward, captivated. He paused, gaze meeting hers directly. "Emily Carter is not an actress. She is not a contract. She is the person I love." A murmur ran through the crowd. He bent slowly to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. The cameras caught the movement in perfect clarity. "I know this may surprise you," he continued, voice steady but filled with raw emotion. "I do not care. I cannot care about perception anymore. What matters is this truth. Emily Carter. Will you marry me?" Emily's breath caught, eyes filling with tears she hadn't anticipated. Around them, flashes erupted. The crowd erupted in murmurs, some exclamations, but none of it reached her. All she could feel was him, the man who had been both her shelter and her challenge, her partner and her anchor. Her voice trembled, barely audible over the din. "Yes." The room erupted in applause, but Emily felt nothing but the warmth of his hand in hers. He pulled her close, their foreheads touching, and for the first time in days, the noise of the world seemed distant, almost irrelevant. Flashes continued, questions murmured, but she only saw him, saw the depth of certainty in his eyes. He had acted not out of bravado, not for revenge, but out of love, the kind that refused to be hidden or diminished by rumor. Victoria's storm had broken, but it did not reach them. The world saw what mattered now. Two people choosing each other, boldly and publicly, despite fear, despite expectation. As cameras clicked and questions flew, Liam whispered softly, lips near her ear, "Nothing else matters. Not now. Not ever." Emily exhaled, a long, shivering breath. She realized he was right. All the contracts in the past, the fears they were irrelevant. What existed between them was undeniable, real, and strong enough to withstand anything. And standing there, in the glare of 1,000 cameras, she finally understood that some truths, especially the truths of the heart, did not need permission to be known. The applause faded into the background as they held each other, the world around them blurring. For once, Emily didn't care about gossip, judgment, or even danger. She only cared about him, and him only about her. Outside, the city hummed, indifferent, yet inside the hall, two hearts had become unbreakable. And somewhere in that moment, Emily knew whatever storms came next, they would face them together. The afternoon sun spilled softly through the classroom windows, painting long stripes of light across the wooden floor. Emily stood by the piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin. The room smelled faintly of chalk, books, and the comforting weight of routine. It had been 6 months since the storm of headlines, the contract, the nights filled with unspoken tension. Now, the world seemed quieter, steadier, as if it had finally exhaled with her. Her students were scattered across the room, small faces full of curiosity and hope. Some were practicing scales, others sketching notes in worn notebooks. She moved between them slowly, pausing to adjust a hand here, whisper a correction there. Each small gesture, gentle and deliberate, carried a part of her heart that had been hardened and softened in equal measure over the past months. Liam stood by the doorway, leaning casually against the frame. He wore a soft sweater instead of a suit, his hair tousled from the city wind. When their eyes met, he gave a faint, private smile, the kind that made her chest lift without a word exchanged. No one else in the room needed to know the history written in that glance, the contracts, the headlines, the storms they had survived, all of it, together. A small hand tugged at her sleeve. One of her youngest students, a girl with a crooked smile, looked up at her and asked, "Miss Emily, will you play the song one more time?" Emily nodded, kneeling to meet her gaze. Of course. She let her fingers glide over the keys, coaxing a soft melody into the quiet classroom. Liam watched her from the doorway, silent and yet entirely present. The song carried a kind of gentle hope, not loud or showy, but quietly persistent, filling the room in a way that made everyone breathe a little deeper. After the last note faded, Emily straightened and glanced at Liam. He came closer, brushing a hand lightly against hers, the familiar weight of his presence grounding her in ways she had never anticipated. "You've changed everything," he whispered. Emily's lips curved softly. "Not everything," she said, "just what needed it." The bell rang, signaling the end of class, and children began to gather their belongings. Laughter echoed down the hall, mingling with the sunlight, as Emily moved among them, offering a few words of encouragement, a quick smile, a gentle nod. She felt the rhythm of life returning, steady and warm. Her brother's recovery had been slow, but complete. The cloud that had once hung over her family had lifted, leaving behind quiet gratitude and the gentle hum of ordinary joy. Liam's hand rested on the small of her back as they walked toward the exit. Outside, the city basked in the soft golden glow of late afternoon. The streets shimmered with heat, the hum of traffic softened by distance, and the world seemed calm in a way that mirrored the peace inside her. She took a deep breath, letting the light touch her face, filling her lungs and heart with something she hadn't realized she was missing until now. "Do you remember the first day we met?" she asked, her voice soft, almost lost to the wind. He nodded, eyes glinting with memory. "I do. You were soaked to the bone, furious, and terrifyingly alive." Emily laughed quietly, the sound carrying a lightness that surprised her. "And you were impossible, cold, precise, completely unyielding." "Still am," he said with a grin, though the warmth in his eyes contradicted the words. They walked a little further in silence, hand in hand, each lost in the quiet rhythm of being together. The skyscrapers around them glinted in the amber sun, casting long shadows that stretched across the pavement, bending gently toward the horizon. Emily stopped for a moment, letting go of his hand to reach for her pocket. Retrieving a small, folded note, she held it up to the light. Reading the familiar handwriting, "You've found your own light." She smiled, slipping it back into her pocket. Liam noticed, his eyebrows raised just slightly, a question in his gaze. "I take it that's important." "It is," she said softly, turning to face him. "It reminds me that even in the darkest moments, we find what really matters, and that light is worth protecting." He nodded slowly, understanding more than she said. "Then let's protect it," he murmured, taking her hand again. Together, the sun continued its descent, spilling gold and amber across their faces. They paused for a moment, standing side by side, not speaking, just feeling the warmth and the gentle pressure of hands intertwined. It was a quiet, ordinary gesture, yet it carried the weight of everything they had endured: fear, doubt, love, and finally, trust. Emily tilted her head, resting it lightly against his shoulder. "I never thought I'd feel this peace again," she whispered. "You deserve it," he replied softly. "And it's just the beginning." A gentle breeze stirred, rustling the leaves of the nearby trees. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the world around her, the laughter of children, the hum of distant traffic, the warmth of the sun, the steady rhythm of Liam's hand in hers. She felt the weight of the past 6 months melt away, replaced with a quiet certainty that they had earned this. No contracts, no threats, no headlines, just life, ordinary, golden, steady life. She opened her eyes to see Liam watching her, a faint smile on his lips. "Shall we go home?" he asked softly. Emily nodded, slipping her hand fully into his. "Home," she echoed. They walked slowly down the sunlit street, shoulders brushing, steps in quiet harmony. The city stretched endlessly before them, alive and indifferent. Yet the world around them had shifted in subtle, irrevocable ways. Emily realized that they were no longer two people lost in circumstance. They were two people who had chosen each other, and in that choice, they had found their place, their peace. As they reached the corner where the sky met the horizon in a blaze of amber and gold, Emily looked up, letting the colors settle in her eyes. Liam squeezed her hand gently, and for a heartbeat, the world was entirely theirs. "I love this," she said softly, her voice almost carried away by the wind. He glanced at her, a slow, sure smile spreading across his face. "So do I." They paused in silence, letting the warmth of the sunset, the hum of the city, and the simple rhythm of their hearts fill the moment. No words were needed, just a breath, a smile, a quiet acknowledgement of all they had endured and all they had found in each other. Emily leaned her head against him one last time, feeling the rise and fall of his chest beneath her cheek, the steady pulse that had become her anchor. She closed her eyes, letting the sun and the silence and the warmth of this moment settle deep inside her. And in that quiet, golden light, she realized this was not just an ending. It was a beginning, a life rebuilt, a love chosen, and a heart finally at peace. The sun dipped lower, spilling the last amber streaks across the city. Emily and Liam stood together, hands entwined, facing the horizon, their shadows stretching long behind them, a simple, unspoken promise of tomorrow, of all the days yet to come. And somewhere in that gentle glow, Emily whispered softly, just to herself, "We found each other?" Liam squeezed her hand, a quiet echo of the sentiment. The world around them continued, vast and unpredictable, but inside that shared moment, they had everything they needed: each other, the calm after the storm, and the gentle certainty that love, when chosen with courage, could illuminate even the darkest corners of life. And for the first time in years, Emily let herself breathe fully, completely, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. The sun finally touched the horizon, dipping into gold, amber, and rose. And in its fading light, the two of them walked forward, hand in hand, hearts open, and the world behind them quietly forgiving, quietly watching, quietly believing in the choice they had made. This story, at its heart, reminds us that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Emily's journey shows how compassion, resilience, and integrity can transform even the most daunting challenges into opportunities for growth and connection. She faced judgment, uncertainty, and the weight of others' expectations, yet chose honesty, empathy, and steadfastness over fear and self-doubt. Liam's transformation, in turn, illustrates the power of trust and vulnerability, the quiet strength that comes from allowing someone to see you fully, without pretense. For those of us navigating the later chapters of life, the lesson is clear. Meaningful relationships are built not on convenience or appearances, but on authenticity, courage, and mutual respect. It is never too late to stand by our values, to protect those we care about, and to open ourselves to love and connection, even when the world seems indifferent. Life's difficulties may test us, but they also reveal the depth of our character and the beauty of human resilience. By embracing honesty, empathy, and courage, we can transform fear into hope and isolation into lasting companionship. In essence, the story encourages us to trust in the human heart, ours and others, and to believe in the quiet, profound possibility of redemption, understanding, and love. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey with Emily and Liam. We hope their story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of courage, love, and resilience. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories that inspire and uplift. Your support means the world to us,